All right, guys, chapter 3 of Free to Choose. Cradle to the Grave. Cradle to the Grave is chapter 3 of Free to Choose. This one's called The Emergence of the Modern Welfare State. The Emergence of the Modern Welfare State. The first modern state to introduce on a fairly large scale the kind of welfare measures that have become popular in most societies today was the newly created German Empire under the leadership of the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. So the first modern state to introduce on a fairly large scale the kind of welfare measures that have become popular in most societies today was the newly created German Empire under the leadership of the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. The first modern state to introduce the welfare measures on a large scale that are now popular in most societies was the newly created German Empire under the leadership of the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck. In the early 1880s, he introduced a comprehensive scheme of Social Security, offering the worker insurance against accident, sickness, old age. His motives were a complex mixture of paternalistic concern for the lower classes and shrewd politics. Paternalistic, like kind of like fatherly concern. His measures served to undermine the political appeal of the newly emerging Social Democrats. It may seem paradoxical that an essentially autocratic and aristocratic state, such as pre-World War I Germany, in today's jargon a right-wing dictatorship, should have led the way in introducing measures that are generally linked to socialism and the left. But there was no paradox. Even putting to one side Bismarck's political motives, believers in aristocracy and socialism share a faith in centralized rule. In rule by command rather than by voluntary cooperation. They're saying, yeah, because I mean, they both just want some rule, right? Rule by command rather than by voluntary cooperation. They differ in who should rule, whether an elite determined by birth or experts supposedly chosen on merit. Both proclaim, no doubt sincerely, that they wish to promote the well-being of the general public, as it in quotes, that they know what is in the public interest, so they know what's best for you and how to attain it better than the ordinary person. Both therefore profess a paternalistic philosophy, and both end up, if they attain power, promoting the interests of their own class in the name of the general welfare. More immediate precursors of the Social Security measures adopted in the 1930s were the measures taken in Great Britain, beginning with the Old Age Pensions Act passed in 1908 and the National Insurance Act in 1911. The Old Age Pensions Act granted to any person over the age of 70 whose income fell below a specified sum a weekly pension that varied according to the recipient's income. It was strictly non-contributory, and so was in one sense simply direct relief, an extension of poor law provisions that had in one form or another existed in Great Britain for centuries. However, A.V. Dicey points out there was a fundamental difference. The pension was regarded as a right whose receipt, in the words of the Act, shall not deprive the pensioner of any franchise, right or privilege or subject him to any disability. So however A.V. Dicey points out, there was a fundamental difference. The pension, old age pensions, right? The pension was regarded as a right whose receipt the pension was regarded as a right whose receipt, like receive, right? In the words of the Act, okay, the pension was regarded as a right whose receipt shall not deprive the pensioner of any franchise, right, or privilege, or subject him to any disability. Wait. So look, it shall not deprive the pensioner. I want to know what a pensioner is. Is that the person giving you the pension? I want to know. That the person giving you the pension? Because he's saying like pensioner, pensioner. A person who receives a pension. Okay. Gotta read this slow, right? The pension was regarded as a right whose receipt shall not deprive the pensioner of any franchise, right, or privilege, or subject to him to any disability. Meaning, like, okay, so you could get money, but you can't, like, just because I'm getting money, I could still have other businesses, right? You can't deprive me of that. Or just say, oh, you can't work because, you're getting this pension. It shows how far we have come from that modest beginning that Dicey, commenting on the act 5 years after its enactment, could write. So it shows how far we have come from that modest beginning that Dicey, commenting on the act 5 years after its enactment, could write. Surely a sensible and a benevolent man may well ask himself whether England has a, or may ask himself whether England as a whole will gain. Or let me read that again. It shows how far we have come from that modest beginning that Dicey, commenting on the act 5 years after its enactment, could write. Surely a sensible and a benevolent man may well ask himself whether England as a whole will gain by enacting that the receipt of poor relief in the shape of a pension shall be consistent with the pensioners retaining the right to join in the election of a member of parliament. It would take a modern Diogenes with a powerful lamp to find anyone today who could vote if receipt of government largesse were a disqualification. It would take a modern Diogenes with a powerful lamp to find anyone who could vote, find anyone today who could vote if receipt of government largesse were a disqualification. It would take a modern Diogenes with a powerful lamp to find anyone today who could vote if receipt of government largesse was a disqualification. He's saying nobody would be able to vote. Largesse, generosity in bestowing money or gifts upon others, money or gifts given generously. Money, gifts given. All right, we're gonna give this money, but you can't vote. Let me go back up here. Pension was regarded as a right whose receipt, in the words of the Act, shall not deprive the pensioner of any franchise right or privilege or subject him to any disability. It would take a modern Diogenes with a powerful lamp to find anyone today who could vote if receipt of the government largely was a disqualification. The National Insurance Act aimed at the attainment of two objects. National Insurance Act aimed at the attainment of two objects. The first is that any person who is employed in the United Kingdom shall, from the age of 16 to 70, be insured against ill health, or in other words, be insured the means for curing illness. The second object is that any such person who is employed in certain employments specified in the Act shall be insured against unemployment, or in other words, be secured support during periods of unemployment. Unlike old age pensions, the system established was contributory. It was to be financed partly by employers, partly by employees, partly by the government. Both because of its contributory nature and because of the contingencies that it sought to insure against, this act was an even more radical departure from prior practice than the Old Age Pensions Act. Under the National Insurance Act, wrote Dicey, the state incurs new and, it may be very burdensome, duties and confers upon wage earners new and very extensive rights. Before 1908, the question whether a man, rich or poor, should insure his health was a matter left entirely to the free discretion or indiscretion of each individual. His conduct no more concerned the state than the question whether he should wear a black coat or brown coat. But the National Insurance Act will, in the long run, bring upon the state, that is, upon the taxpayers, a far heavier responsibility than is anticipated by English electors. Bring upon the state, the National Insurance Act will, in the long run, bring upon the state, that is, upon the taxpayers, a far heavier responsibility than is anticipated by the English electors. Unemployment insurance is, in fact, the admission by a state of its duty to insure a man against the evil ensuing from his having no work. So, unemployment insurance is, in fact, the admission by a state of its duty to insure a man against the evil ensuing from his having no work. The National Insurance Act is in accordance with the doctrine of socialism. It is hardly reconcilable with the liberalism or even the radicalism of 1865. It's a good point. It is, in fact, the admission by a state of its duty to insure a man against the evil. So it's like saying, oh, we don't have to get you work. Here, there's no work. You don't need work. What do you need work for? It's very, very interesting right here. Very interesting. So it's like taking the responsibility that the government is supposed to keep you busy and provide work for you and keep you competent, keep you like your mind a wow. That's why what have people have dementia, people have diabetes, people are dying, people are suicidal, people are killing themselves, people are on drugs, people are killing other people are in prison, fathers aren't around, women are, you know. These early British measures, like Bismarck's, illustrate affinity between aristocracy and socialism. In 1904, Winston Churchill left the Tory party, the party of the aristocracy, for the Liberal Party. As a member of Lloyd George's cabinet, he took a leading role in social reform legislation. The change of party, which proved temporary, required no change of principles, as it would have a half-century earlier when the Liberal Party was the party of free trade abroad and laissez-faire at home. The social legislation he sponsored, while different in scope and kind, was in the tradition of the paternalistic factory acts that had been adopted in the 19th century largely under the influence of the so-called Tory radicals, a group drawn in considerable part from the aristocracy and imbued with the sense of obligation to look after the interests of the working classes and to do so with their consent and backing, not through coercion. It is no exaggeration to say that the shape of Britain today owes more to Tory principles of the 19th century than to the ideas of Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. Another example that doubtless influenced FDR's New Deal was Sweden, the middle way. As Marquis Childs would title his book, published in 1936, Sweden enacted compulsory old age pensions in 1915 as a contributory system. Pensions were payable to all after the age of 67, regardless of financial status. The size of the pension depended on the payments individuals had made into the system. Such payments were supplemented by government funds. In addition to old age pensions and later unemployment insurance, Sweden went in for government ownership of industry, public housing, and consumers' cooperatives on a large scale. What's that book called? Marquis Childs, The Middle Way. I want to read that one. The Middle Way, meaning the working man, right? Central government, centralized economy. Is Milton Friedman's idea of Sweden true? Friedman promoted the theory that changes in the money supply affect real economic activity in the short run, the price level in the long run. Is Friedman a neoclassical? Yes, Milton Friedman is widely considered a prominent neoclassical economist, particularly associated with the Chicago School of Economic Thought, which is a neoclassical approach that emphasizes free markets and monetarism. He's considered one of the most influential figures in the field. Friedman rejected Keynesian economics and challenged many of the assumptions underlying popular economic theory at the time. A standard economic theory moved away from Keynesian and towards the Chicago School of Economics, a neoclassical movement. So they believe that supply pushes things, right? So supply, and you keep people working, you keep people producing things, supply. I need to read more on that, but I need to ask as well. I have another question to ask my professor. Hmm. Peace.